Doctor Ho Ho Ho. Yes, I know, that was a rather terrible way to start this video, but apparently it's the most wonderful time of the year. It's Christmas, a time to be merry, a time to put your cares away, a time to quell the subconscious desires to murder your entire family as they argue over the roast turkey, and most of all, a time to spend your money on increasing the power of transnational corporations that strangle the individual in exchange for cheap, unnecessary tat. So, was that too festive and positive an intro? Oh, okay. So Christmas, and yeah, there have been a few Doctor Who Christmas specials, haven't there? So what this video is, basically Oliver, last Christmas, when this channel had just started, Oliver did his own video looking at his top 5 Christmas specials. For the sake of balance, I'm going to present my take, my own subjective opinion, emphasis on those two words, on all the Christmas specials from 2005 when they started doing them to the present day when they're not quite doing them in the same sense. They're still doing specials over the festive period, so Resolution will be included as part of this ranking. Revolution of the Daleks won't be, because that's not aired yet at time of recording, but we'll be doing our own review on that when it goes out. So, festive specials, what do I make of them? So I've actually done something I've not ever done really with Christmas. I've gone on, not a binge watch, because I didn't watch them all in one session, and I watched them out of order, but so I've been watching all the Christmas specials from the Christmas Invasion through to the present day. And yeah, so here are my opinions, starting with the Russell T Davies era. And yeah, I would say one thing about the whole of the RTD era of Christmas specials, and that is that I find them quite difficult to watch now. And this isn't because of quality. It's all the specials I do actually recommend, although clearly as you go to the end of the RTD era, they are slightly weaker, I think. The End of Time is probably the weakest out of all of them. But the thing is, because the 2005-2006 specials I used to watch to death on the DVDs when I was younger, I can't really watch them now because I watch them so often, so they're no longer fresh, and I don't feel like I can sort of come to them with an open mind and sort of enjoy them in the same way because I'm too familiar with them. But I still watched them recently, and while okay, so we'll start with A Christmas Carol. Now, for my mum, this is the benchmark of Doctor Who. You know, whenever she talks about Doctor Who, she always uses this as a kind of yardstick. She always mentions saving the world with a Satsuma. In the same way fans might mention the one with the angels or the one with, Daleks and Cybermen together. Mum always mentions saving the world with a Satsuma. That's her phrase to sum up Doctor Who in a single sentence. And I think that really sums the Christmas Invasion up and all the RTD specials up, because they're not, whereas the series sort of cater to fans while also trying to get newbies in, the Christmas specials are kind of aware that they're the most likely episodes to be aired to a casual audience, and these were the highest rated episodes during the RTD era. They were getting 12 million viewers by the end of the noughties, and I think the specials take that on board and are very accessible episodes. Of course, the disadvantage of that is if you're looking for a really intricate plot, you might find nits to pick if you're really delving deep with analysis. If you start questioning stuff in terms of the plot, it can fall down a little bit. But they're crowd pleasers. There's something in them for everyone. And that applies to the Christmas Invasion, that applies to the Runaway Bride, that applies to Voyage of the Damned, that applies to the Next Doctor, and that applies to the End of Time as well. Even the End of Time, yes. So, the Christmas Invasion, I think this was a very good intro for David Tennant, which is saying something considering he only pops around really in the final 20 minutes. And it's a brilliant performance and a brilliant script from Russell, because Russell really gives David every possible thing to do. Stern, witty, ahead of the game always. And it's a real tour de force from David Tennant. He hits the ground running. But even there, ignoring David Tennant, there's stuff there to enjoy as well, I think. The Runaway Bride as well, I appreciate this because, David Tennant as well, another great performance. He's really sunk into the role by this time, and he feels really confident, despite the fact this is only his second special. But I think the real stars of the show are Catherine Tate, whose character, starts out sort of being a shouty bride, but even in this episode was a three-dimensional character. Especially the scene when she finds out that her groom Lance has betrayed her. That's an excellent scene in my view. Even better in its kind of extended format, because it was actually truncated down for broadcast. Kind of Lance goes into greater detail on his justification for betraying the human race and hating the human race, which is quite fascinating. You can understand why they trimmed it down, but it's still a great scene. Great acting from Catherine Tate and Don Gillett as well, who played Lance Bennett, and Sarah Parish, injecting a real sense of humour into the Empress of the Rachnos. Well, that was there in the script, but she really gives it life, and the prosthetics are very convincing as well, very good for the time. Yeah, great performances in The Runaway Bride. Maybe the Christmas tree doesn't quite work as well as it did in the original, the Christmas Invasion. That's something I forgot to mention. The first couple of Christmas specials really do have fun with the Christmas tree becoming weaponized. I think Robert Holmes would approve, looking down on us. Murray. I still think a lot of people debate what Murray Gold's best music was for the show, but I think it's his treatment of Jingle Bells playing in the background, which only adds to the macabre atmosphere. That's even better than any of his Doctor Who themes or I Am the Doctor or what have you. So that's the first two specials. And then Voyage of the Damned. Now, a lot of people don't really like this one because they think it's rather stupid, and I would have to agree it's quite stupid in some ways. But I have strong nostalgia for this one because this is my first Christmas special that I remember seeing live, and this was the year I sort of really became a Doctor Who fan, and this is the first Christmas I actually remember. I was about 6, I just turned 6 at the time, so this is the first Christmas I really vividly remember watching it around Nan's house, trying to stroke a wasp and then getting stung by it. That was fun. But yeah, I can watch this and never really get bored of it, and you have a very light tone fighting very bleak events, but they kind of prevail. The tone feels utterly right, which is quite remarkable when you actually examine what's happening. So yeah, there's a good reason for liking it. If Oliver's justification that it's pure RTD is not enough for you. So yeah, effortlessly melds various tones together without feeling too jarring, even when you have Buckingham Palace being thrown in later on. And like I say, something for everyone here. The next Doctor follows 2008. Now, I thought before this rewatch that it was perhaps the worst of the weakest of the RTD specials, because I didn't particularly remember it. And I think really it's a similar story with The Runaway Bride. When we watched like the first 5 minutes, I just thought, this is a bit too silly, and yeah, there's not a lot to pick over in this opening sequence that I've watched time and time again. But as it gets going, when it does get going, it really does get going, because at the end I became really involved in the action in a way that I wasn't really with other specials like the Christmas Invasion or the End of Time. And certainly when you get to the end, it has the most uplifting ending. I was smiling by the end of it, and hopefully you'll understand why when you watch it. The Cybermen are robots in this one. Their character's not as well explored as other stories, as say World Enough and Time, but when everything else is actually pretty good, I like the whole sort of plot twist of the fugue state, and how sort of the character who's suffering the fugue state recovers from it. Of course, David Morrissey hams up his character, but who can blame him? He's having fun. But yeah, I like this, and I think the Victorian setting really works quite well. This is actually the first Christmas special to have a period setting and not be set in the present day, which works in its favour. Then we get to the End of Time. Now, again, I had a strong nostalgic feeling for this special, but a lot of people don't like it, or, feeling for it has soured, 10 years after it went out. I think, I loved it when it went out because it felt David Tennant leaving Doctor Who was at the time an event, and I think people forget now how big an event it was. I mean, this was the biggest show on television, and its leading man was going out, and for many people, myself included, who hadn't watched Series 1 when it first went out, this is the first time he was our Doctor, and this was our first regeneration. Can you imagine how traumatic that was? And I was pretty traumatised when the regeneration actually happened. I remember being in tears, even though we'd already seen it in The Stolen Earth, which was actually pretty good preparation in hindsight for the traumatic event. But even then, it was pretty hard to... But yeah, it was an event so big that they even made a special Christmas ident for BBC One that year that preceded all the programmes where the Doctor, used the TARDIS as a sleigh. It was all very bizarre looking back at it because the telly was pretty over... And the radio as well. I remember there being lots of radio programmes publicising the event. David Tennant playing some of the songs, and he did a special Radio 2 show and all the rest of it. So it was pretty heavily publicised. Yeah, and it felt like an event, and a lot of people complained about the 2-hour 15 length and the fact it feels really operatic, and some say it's over the top, and I think that works. I quite like the fact that it's... The thing about The End of Time, it's clearly going for operatic Shakespearean tragedy. And maybe looking back, 2 hours 15, it's too long overall. The first part takes a bit of a while to get going. But I quite liked the fact it was going, for really dramatic. The only thing is, again, if you analyse the plot, you might find nits to pick. But you can't deny that it has atmosphere and some brilliant performances, and it sets itself up to be, this really big, overblown story. But actually, as time goes on, it actually ends up being one of the most intimate stories. You have a lot of characters in part 1, and then they become background material because of the Master Race, that brilliant cliffhanger, which I still think is a brilliant cliffhanger in part 1. Bizarre, but just when you think it can't get any bigger, the Time Lords return. And actually, thinking about it now, the Master Race is an ingenious idea, not because of the whole horrifying idea of social conformity, but also because, John Sim, is brilliant actor in that case, but it also allows the special to kind of get rid of all the characters and strip itself right back, so you just have a few characters and the pace slows right down, and it works really well. So I understand why some people hate aspects of the plot, but I always like the sense of scale and the sense of atmosphere that you get. It got the regeneration tone right in my view, and I don't mind the big 20-minute sequence at the end, because like I say, an event at the time, this was the end of an era. A lot of these characters we'd grown quite attached to, and we were probably never going to see them again. It's only fitting they get a send-off like this, and they all get fully appreciated. It's like a kind of walk down at the end of a theatre production. And I think, given that we were at the end of something pretty big, that was appropriate in my view. Yes, it's self-indulgent, but appropriate. What else do they need to say? I think maybe there are too many characters, and maybe David Tennant doesn't actually have a lot to do when you think about it, but he still gives a good performance. And yeah, I have mixed views on it, because I can understand a lot of the criticisms, but I'm trying to juggle that with my own nostalgic love for it. But I think maybe, like I say, 2 hours, 15 minutes is a bit too long, because I was doing other stuff in the background. I couldn't help it because, it was quite long when I was watching this on Netflix. It's quite hard to maintain the attention of 2 hours 15 when not lots happening, but it's just build up. But again, that might be because I watched it quite a lot when I was younger. I have to mention the direction from Euros Lynn, because obviously they were doing less episodes this year, but it feels properly cinematic. It is like you're watching a movie. But yeah, I like it overall. Like I said, it's probably the weakest of the specials, but it's good. When I say specials, I meant RTD specials, by the way. And then we get on to Stephen Moffat delivering his long-awaited take on the Christmas special. And it's a tribute to Charles Dickens, but in a way that feels totally original and makes the original text its own, while still translating it pretty well to modern audiences. A Christmas Carol has some brilliant world building. I love the idea of fish that can swim in fog. The production values are absolutely brilliant, with only one CGI shot looking dated 10 years on, although, that goes without saying for all the specials, really. And great humour as well, which is typical of a Moffat script. I did have some concerns. Catherine Sardick doesn't really have any agency, because whereas in the original Dickens novel he makes his own decision to change his ways, his past and essentially his character is rewritten by the Doctor, although he kind of complains about that towards the end, so it's at least acknowledged. But I quite enjoyed this special. I'd recommend it, but then again, I recommend all the specials. I don't really have a lot to say about it, though, whereas I do have a lot to say about the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. Now, when I first watched this, I thought it was okay. Hadn't really developed critical faculties around this time, so I just thought it was okay, like any other episode of Doctor Who. And then it kind of developed a reputation, didn't it? People don't really talk about this one, and when they do, they don't like it. And I watched it once, many years after, and I hated it. But I watched it recently, expecting to hate it again. The things I didn't like about it first time around were the tonal inconsistency. I thought it felt too light and then too dark, and didn't really balance the two very well, like Voyage of the Damned did. And then I didn't like the ham-fisted feminist messaging. Not that the whole idea. You may know the scene I'm talking about, when that halo thing is put on Claire Skinner's head, and it turns out she can pilot the forest because and that would have been fine if they'd just explained it as sort of being because she's a mother. She's strong because of that. If they'd explained it in a way like that, I wouldn't have a problem. But it's just, she's strong because she's a woman, and men are weak. I find that slightly uncomfortable. But that's just me. But looking back, I still have that issue with Doctor and the Widow and the Wardrobe, but it's only a minor quibble. I don't actually hate this. I think it's okay. The dialogue's certainly not as strong as Christmas Carol, but I think Moffat actually turns in quite good script, and it's actually quite different to the Christmas specials beforehand, and it certainly works as is, even though I think the middle section is a little bit slow, but it picks up again towards the end. And I don't think Moffat's to blame here. I have my skepticisms that maybe this could have been better directed. I would mention the director, Farron Blackburn. This was his first episode for Doctor Who. He only directed one episode after this, and that was The Rings of Ackerton. I think that was an okay episode, but it's not a particularly well-received episode, never has been. And I think with this episode, he wasn't really great with directing the actors. The actors seem like they're sort of on autopilot and going through the motions. That is the adult actors. And I think the deforestation crew were could have played their lines a bit straighter instead of trying too hard to be comic, especially the guy who had daddy issues. On the other hand, there's a moment when Claire Skinner, her character, hugs her children and says "best Christmas ever," and it zooms in on her face, but it feels like there's not enough emphasis on her guilt and sadness at not being able to tell the kids that their dad's dead. That feels somewhat glossed over, although maybe the music has a say in that. But on the other hand, it's actually, the production values in general are not too bad. They're actually pretty good, even better, I think, than A Christmas Carol, because I mentioned that dated shot, and I don't think there's a single dated CGI shot in this episode. And I think that's actually quite an achievement when you consider, up to this point, most Christmas specials have been shot quite early on in the summer. David Tennant shot his last scene for The End of Time on the 20th of May 2009, if I recall correctly, which I think I do. Pretty sure I do, anyway. This one, I think because of various production problems that were happening, I think they fell behind on Series 6, and then this ended up being shot in September, so quite late. They gave themselves less time. So when you consider that, the production values are excellent. The child actors are pretty good for child actors, I think. Holly Earl in particular, who's gone on to greater things. Um, yeah, like I think maybe it could have worked better if it was more stripped back. If it was like an early Hartnell episode where it focuses more on the Doctor trying to sort of help this family go through their grief at losing the husband and the father who dies in World War II or is supposed to die. And yeah, it maybe would have worked quite well if it's just been the first 20 minutes and then they just wander around, and if it was just sort of focusing on that character development. If there was no sense of threat, if the wooden creatures and deforestation crew don't really need to be there, I don't think. But this is the thing with the Moffat episodes as well. The bad parts, or the parts you don't like, are somewhat necessary in order for the good parts to really work. Because, like I say, the final 15 minutes are actually pretty good drama that had me hooked on my seat. There's a good quote at the end that I think sums it all up. Got a bit glitchy in the middle, but it all worked out in the end. The Doctor says that at the very end, before that brilliant final scene where he's reunited with Amy and Rory. And I think that quote really sums up the Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. Maybe could have been improved, or maybe the improvements I suggested wouldn't have worked. But we'll never know. And then the year after that, 2012, we have the Snowmen. I will say the Punch and Judy moment is perhaps the greatest punching of the air moment for me personally in the whole of Doctor Who. And I think if you're newer to Who, this is actually a good episode to start off with. It's a nice intro to the Doctor and Clara, or at least the Victorian Clara. The Victorian backdrop works well. The plot is nice and straightforward. If the villains are perhaps underused, though I suppose it's good to leave your audience wanting more. Clara's death and subsequent Impossible Girl subplot is perhaps too much in retrospect. But, I don't actually mind the death kind of lends a good punch to this episode, and kind of, it's ballsy for a Christmas special. But then again, I suppose we had Astrid Peth, but this was... Yeah, I'm quite ambiguous about and ambivalent about, the whole death of Clara and that subplot. But I think in this episode it works here. It's only later on it kind of became a problem with Matt Smith leaving quite soon and not really giving time for the relationship between the 11th Doctor and Clara to really breathe. Would have been nice. Yeah, and I get the criticisms that maybe it would have been nice to have the Victorian companion for a change as opposed to modern Earth women. But yeah, that's my only niggle really with the Snowman. And I don't care what anyone says. I love the character of Strax. A lot of people say he's too comic, but I think, better to be entertaining than not entertaining. And it's somewhat, it's true to the original brief for the Sontarans in a way, because as Terence Dicks said in one of the DVD documentaries, Robert Holmes intended for the Sontarans to be a satire on gun-ho militarism. And, Strax is true to that, but it's just taking it in a more comic, Moffat-esque direction. And, it just about works. That said, I think it's good that we seem to be getting a Sontaran story where we actually have a lot of Sontarans for the first time since 2008, and they're probably treated a bit more seriously. Like 2008's The Sontaran Stratagem. But I didn't mind Strax or the Paternoster Gang. I think they were ditched at the right time, just before they became too irritating. As Moffat said, the moment you start relying on something, you should throw it away. But even though their last story is somewhat anticlimactic. But yeah, I like Strax. And I will hear no words to the contrary, because I'm tolerant like that. And then we move on to the Time of the Doctor. Again, this is quite an interesting one, because when I first saw this, the end of time was still quite recent memory, and I thought regeneration stories had to really sort of have a slow build and, really start with a kind of morose feel, like there's going to be regeneration at the end, and the Doctor's aware of it, and it needs to sort of have like 2 hours and time to properly develop and feel really operatic. This didn't quite have the same feel, and I hated it because it felt like it was trying to cram too much in 1 hour, and there were some appalling attempts at humour, uncharacteristically appalling for Moffat's usual good standards. I normally find Moffat's humour quite good. And I thought this was a bit too low-key for a regeneration story. Because, like I say, I thought... At the time, I thought RCD's kitchen sink drama approach, I was married to that, really. Although in hindsight, you think maybe he relied on it too much. But I think looking back on it, I have warmed to it since then. I still think maybe it's a bit too rushed, or maybe not rushed, but it doesn't use its time very effectively. There's some Silence and Weeping Angel cameos that are perhaps a bit unnecessary, and I still hate a lot of the jokes that are there for no reason, like the nudity and the boyfriend stuff. Although Matt Smith's line about "I'm starting to think this could be causing a lot of tension" is quite funny. And the rest of the dialogue isn't too bad, and flies. And I do think this is Matt Smith's greatest performance. I won't lie, in some of the other Christmas specials, he didn't quite have the presence, really. Doctor and the Widow and the Wardrobe, he was kind of just there going through the motions. But he perks up here, and I think this is the finest hour as the Doctor. And he's certainly served well by the script, because it may not be the kind of regeneration story that I'd expected or wanted, but it's what Matt Smith certainly deserved, and it's certainly sent his Doctor out on a heroic high, because he sacrifices himself to save a town. And, well, not that the 10th Doctor didn't do that, but, you really feel sympathy for the Doctor and, his heroism, really. That really comes across more than it did in The End of Time, even though it was there. Bit cringy to see him claim to be the sheriff and kind of perform a hostile takeover, but nice to see him being the sort of heroic defender down with the kids. And the standout scene for me is really the death of the Cyberman's head, Handles. Stephen Moffat made me feel sorry for a Cyberman's head, the bastard. So yeah, still a load of cringe scenes that I really can't watch. I'm like, oh! But it really has warmed on me. I don't get why the Doctor lies to Clara a second time, and why did you wait until now to resolve all the loose ends from Series 5 and 6 that by now we didn't care about and have barely been mentioned at all in Series 7. So yeah, maybe it's a bit too fussy and unfocused, but overall pretty good, and certainly better than I gave it credit for on 25th December 2013, because at that time I really hated it. And I thought I was going to hate Last Christmas, the following year's special. The moment I saw the teasers with Santa Claus, I thought, God, this is it. Doctor Who's jumped the shark. This is going to be too light and frivolous, and, Santa Claus just doesn't belong in a Christmas special. But actually, the way he was used here was pretty damn effective, because it retains his ambiguity, and it's not really Santa Claus, it's our perception of Santa Claus, because, of course, it's an episode about dreams. And, yeah, like I say, I worried before transmission that the result would be too light for my personal taste. I couldn't be more wrong. This is very dark. For that reason, it's probably one of my standout favourites, really. But, yeah, I like how Santa's not proven to exist or be fictitious character. And Moffat was nice, not just with sort of, Doctor Who headcanon in general. That was a nice thing about Moffat. I think maybe it's slightly drawn out, it could have been trimmed down to sort of make it tighter, but I really like the balance of fun while taking the Christmas specials in a very different and darker direction, and I think the cast are excellent. Yeah, not too much to say, I like it, and probably one of my favourites. And at this point, it's interesting, I think, to talk about the themes that have kind of inspired the Christmas specials. Obviously, they're inspired by Christmas, but different aspects of Christmas. By this point, Doctor Who had kind of garnered a reputation for using sort of famous Christmas symbols like Christmas trees and Christmas crackers and sort of snowmen, that sort of thing. And I remember a sketch in 2015, the Christmas special of Dead Rinners, that kind of parodied this by having the Doctor face mulled wine, because they were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. And it did feel like that when we got to Santa Claus in Last Christmas. So perhaps wisely, you see a kind of different approach with the latter Moffat specials. The Husbands of River Song and The Return of Dr. Mysterio kind of form a loose two-parter, because actually it was only when rewatching them in September for the first time since their initial broadcast, I noticed they actually feature the same antagonists. And they're actually very similar in tone. They kind of go for that. Richard, instead of being influenced by sort of Christmas symbols like trees and so on, they are influenced by the sort of films that are on at Christmas. Obviously, Voyage of the Damned had done the Poseidon Adventure, and then A Christmas Carol had done A Christmas Carol, and the Widow and the Wardrobe had done Narnia. Not really the books, but the films, the Disneyfied films that were quite popular around that time. Here, Husbands of River Song and Return of Dr. Mysterio are very Richard Curtis. They kind of go for a Love Actually feel. They're these rom-coms that sort of end with love being finally requited. And that's very true of Husbands of River Song. And if you can get past the fact that it's really based on a conceit, a case of mistaken identity, you know, the doctor arriving seconds before the surgeon, and he's like, you know, Nardole knocks on the door and goes, "Are you the surgeon?" "Oh, I might be. Why?" Medical emergency." "Well, I'm not the surgeon, but I suppose I'd better go have a look." And then the surgeon turns up later to find out that actually, you know, he's too late. So a bit conceited from that point of view, I think. But if you can get past that, it's a fine ride, and you know, pretty good humoured. Great performances from Robert Curtis as Scratch, you know, the guy with the head that comes apart. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say about it, but I think it was a pretty good resolution to the River Song arc, and at that time, Stephen Moffat's story, because this was originally going to be Moffat's last episode, hence the kind of full circle stuff with the Singing Towers of Darillium later on that won't make much sense to casual viewers, but what the hell. But of course, Chris Chibnall was still writing Series 3 of Broadchurch and doing that, so we got 2 more Christmas specials from Moffat. The Return of Dr. Mysterio is a similar case to the Husbands of River Song, very similar tone, as I said. And yeah, these specials I kind of watched and thought that was okay, and then I'd kind of heard they got a terrible reputation, and saw them for the first time since their original broadcast quite recently, you know, after 5 years, and thought they were okay, pretty good. I'd certainly sit down to watch them again. And The Return of Dr. Mysterio, it would have been so easy for the first episode after a gap year, which at that time was kind of unprecedented since Doctor had returned, to, you know, try to make a big statement about, you know, we really are back to our best and kind of repeating ourselves and not really taking any risks, you know, being very careful. Here we get a superhero crossover. You can't, you know, you might not like that, but you can't accuse the special of being formulaic and, you know, resting on their laurels or whatever. And it actually just about works, and it's a fun ride. And that's all you want really for Christmas, just a fun, populist ride. And I think my dad has the final word because he watched this episode with me. And I've always remembered what he said about it. It's naff, but in that very quintessentially Doctor Who way that becomes good. Like Voyage of the Damned. If you like Voyage of the Damned, you'll like The Return of Dr. Mysterio. Because it's that kind of stupid, but it just about works. Then, Twice Upon a Time. I've done a review video on this that it's probably out by the time you watch this, so go watch that, where I kind of say, you know, I make my thoughts very clear on it. I think it's certainly the weakest Moffat special. It's not bad. There's certainly enough good moments to prevent it from being outright shit. Like the Christmas Armistice, the First Doctor pondering why good always wins, and great score from Murray Gold. But as I said in that review, it feels workmanlike and inconsequential, almost as though Moffat had to cobble something together at the last minute to cover for Chris Chibnall refusing to write a Christmas special for whatever reason. And it feels like various Christmas specials fighting each other because it's made up of recycled ideas. So, I mean, yeah, it's only with that context really that you can kind of appreciate Twice Upon a Time. I didn't really like sort of Capaldi's regeneration being drawn out and things like that, and the First Doctor being underused. Yeah, left me a bit cold. But yeah, do watch my previous review on Twice Upon a Time if you haven't already. And then Resolution, which is technically not a Christmas special, but it is a festive special, so I suppose we can have it here. And I thought this was okay at the time, and as I record this, I've literally just watched it in the last couple of hours for the first time in a while. And yeah, I actually really liked it. I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm supposed to hate the Chibnall era, I know, and yeah, I'd still think Series 12 was passable, but not great. But I think certainly, say what you like about Chibnall, he certainly knows how to write the Daleks, because after, 10 years of, we had Dalek stories from Moffat that weren't really, I mean, for better or worse, and I personally like Into the Daleks, certainly, and Asylum of the Daleks as well, and although Victory of the Daleks was a little bit jumping the shark with Spitfires in space, but they were certainly very different Dalek stories. They were trying to be different and focusing more on the psychological aspects of what makes a Dalek, really. Either that or the Daleks weren't really, they were underused and were kind of just there. Whereas here, you have a very back-to-basics Dalek story with only one Dalek appearing, and it's proven pretty well that just one Dalek is enough to overturn a whole planet, nearly. But it's certainly a very capable threat, and you feel like it's very easy for the Dalek to win. The scene with the Dalek and the army is pretty good. I do think that this is probably Chris Chibnall's strongest script. The strongest musical score from Sega Nakanola, because I can actually remember some of the leitmotifs. Very unusual sort of rock drumming and guitar score, but it works pretty well. Best performances from Jodie Whittaker and Tosin Cole and the rest of the cast. The only bits I still am left pretty cold by the scene where the 13th Doctor just blanks Aaron, and it keeps being referred to as Ryan's dad, and kind of. And there's this terrible scene where, Aaron and Graham are having a conversation, and Aaron's like, I've been a terrible human being. And rather than being comforting and kind, like saying, oh, no, you're not, Graham just goes, no, there's still time, mate. I just feel really sorry for Aaron, because he's treated like shit, but, I mean, keeping true to its name, that plot arc was pretty well resolved. Aaron proves himself, and, all the broken ties are mended. Yeah, I really liked it. I can't believe I'm saying that about a Chibnall episode, but I liked it. I don't like a lot of other Chibnall episodes, but I mean, it leaves me confident for Revolution of the Daleks, because that's, carrying on from Resolution. And I think Resolution, save a couple of awkward jokes, and maybe the two plot arcs could have been a bit more intertwined, but that kind of rectifies itself at the end. But apart from that, the Chibnall, this episode was really Chibnall playing to his strengths, and you get a sense that, Dalek Stories is one of his strengths. So hopefully it will be alright. And Resolution did show signs of potential and improvement that Series 12 may have squandered, but hopefully we can regain. And yeah. So to cut a long story short, if you're looking for a Christmas episode of your favourite TV show or Doctor Who, then you're not in short supply. There are, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, technically, by my counting, Christmas specials. Well, 13 and one New Year's special to go through before the one that comes out on New Year's Day, the next one. And they're all pretty good. There are some that will appeal more to casual viewers. There are some that will appeal more to new fans. There's a good deal of variety. There's ones that are more stripped back. There are ones that are more over the top. There are ones that are influenced by popular literature and films. There are ones that are, purple. There are ones that are pink. There are lots, there's pretty good consistent quality control with these Christmas specials, in my view. Yeah, there were ones that I was expecting to hate, and I watched them all, and whereas, some didn't really grab my attention as well, but that's only because I'd watched them, like 1,000 times before, and I find it very hard to, to really watch something that I've watched for 1,000 times and see it differently, and keep engaged with it. But there's something here for everyone, and I was expecting to hate certain specials, and none of them really disappointed me. You know, there were some that I thought, yeah, maybe this particular element could be improved, but it was only nitpicking. I really liked them all, but then I'm very easy to impress. And you may have different opinions as well. Feel free to drop them in the comments. But my favourite Christmas special is probably Last Christmas, with Christmas Carol, The Next Doctor, Resolution sort of coming close, and Voyage of the Damned as well. Those are the ones that I've kind of found myself enjoying on this recent rewatch. And yeah, so Doctor Who Christmas specials are very good. Wherever you are, I hope you have a very happy Christmas. If I don't see you, I don't quite know what the plan is when this video is going to come out, but I do know we are planning to review Revolution of the Daleks when it comes out. We haven't quite organised the specific details of that, so do keep an eye on our Twitter account at CynicalWho, and keep an eye on this YouTube channel for when videos come out. Yeah, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we shall speak to you soon. Goodbye.